All right. It looks like I'm live, and so I think I'm supposed to be giving an introduction to all you fine people out there ready to watch this discussion about affordable housing. My name is Will Huntsberry. I'm voice of San Diego's education reporter, and just want to get some quick housekeeping out of the way before we get started. You probably already know who we are and subscribe to all our newsletters and love us. I hope you do. If you don't know, Voice of San Diego is a news outlet that's nonprofit, funded by the public. We're answerable to the public, and our mission is to hold public officials accountable for the things they say, make sure they stay true to their word, and when they don't, we call them out for it. And also, we want to give you the information you need as a public to engage and be good citizens and hold public officials accountable yourself. And that's what PolitiFest is about, getting all the local voter information to you that you need in a fun and interesting way, hopefully. So just a couple more things here. One is I want to give a big thanks to our sponsors, because that's something I'm supposed to do right now, and we should be very grateful for them, because without them we couldn't put this on. We want to thank the Google News Initiative for supporting the creation of this as a virtual event, and we want to thank the College of Arts and Sciences at USD for underwriting all student tickets. Also, the San Diego Foundation for supporting our community conversations. And also thanks to Cox Communications, SDG&E, the Atlantis Group, the City of San Diego Retired Employees Association, City Heights Community Development Corporation, the San Diego Democratic Party, and Business for Good. So again, thank you to all our sponsors. By investing in this, they clearly also want to be good citizens, and we should thank them for that. Remember, PolitiFest runs through this Saturday. There's all kinds of events. You should go to as many as you possibly can. But for the ones you can't get to, they will be recorded, turned around the next day for you to see. Some of our events will also be in English and Spanish. So if you would like to see a translation, you certainly can. One little more plug here. If you would like a VOSD, Voice of San Diego mug or pint glass, we have those. I'll post the links for them. And last, please comment on this. Please put your questions out there so the panelists can get to them. And now I'm going to turn it over to the amazing Lisa Halverstadt. She's one of the best reporters in this town, and she's the best who could be talking about affordable housing to you. So here she is. She's got a little PowerPoint for you to explain some things. Take it away.
Thank you, Will. That was a very kind introduction. So to start, before we get into the panel and we talk to our panelists, I wanted to just kind of run through the basics of Measure A and our affordable housing situation here in San Diego. So to start, obviously we want to thank our sponsors again, and our media partners. And we'll be talking to our panelists in just a moment. But let's start just with a quick understanding of the housing crisis that we're in San Diego. So a recent analysis of census data back in 2018 had estimated that San Diego County needs 142,590 more affordable rental homes to meet regional demand. And that was up 4% from 2017. And the state also sets housing goals for San Diego and other communities across the state. And San Diego has long failed to meet both the state's low income and middle income housing production goals. Measure A is proposing to try to help address this problem. It's proposing to increase property taxes in the city of San Diego to allow the city to pursue up to $900 million in bond financing that could help fund 7,500 affordable housing units for low-income seniors, families, workers, homeless San Diegans, and people with disabilities. And the tax increase would start at about $3 for every $100,000 of a property's taxable value. So this is different than what you might pay on the market, really more about what the appraised value as far as taxes go or assessed valuation is. The rate would gradually increase as the city issues more bonds, so it could potentially get to be about $21 per $100,000 of assessed value. Now, for a median home, about $600,000 value, the increase would start at about $1.57 a month or $18.84 annually, and could rise to $10.42 a month or $125 annually. So what would this pay for if approved? It's important to note that this would pay or would be funding subsidized affordable housing, which I often refer to as affordable housing with a capital A. Basically, these are projects that tend to rely on tax credits and other sorts of financing. And this tax measure, if approved, would help provide another source of financing for these projects, which really are often, if you think about it, Andrew Cate, who I work with here at Voice of San Diego, once likened affordable housing financing to kind of like a game of Jenga. All the different funding streams, and I'm sure our panelists will talk about that tonight, are really important to making one of those projects possible. This would be a piece of that pie. And with these projects, rents are typically capped at about 30% of a resident's income. And the assumption is that about 4,700 of the 7,500 units that we're talking about would be affordable housing units, again, with a capital A, not the sort of units that you might find in some of the city's older neighborhoods that are naturally affordable just because of their age or condition. This would also pay, if approved, for permanent supportive housing. The supporters of this measure are estimating it could produce about 2,800 units for vulnerable residents, often formerly homeless people. So what is permanent supportive housing? These are units that typically come with on-site services and amenities, maybe a computer room, community activities, and perhaps most importantly, case managers who regularly check in with residents and provide services, perhaps mental health care, substance abuse treatment, or just, straight supportive services just to make sure that they're managing well. So a very important thing, this is going to come up, I know, a lot in our conversation tonight. Subsidized affordable housing is not cheap. The Los Angeles Times had done analysis of state data earlier this year and found that the average subsidized affordable apartment in the state now costs about $500,000 to produce. That's a lot. And that number, keep in mind that also factors in San Francisco, where the numbers tend to be higher. So that does tick the number up a bit. But this is a major problem statewide, including in San Diego. And the reasons for that, which I'm sure our panelists will get into a lot, are the high land and materials costs, regulation, labor and environmental standards, and also neighborhood opposition, which I'm sure will come up in this discussion as well. Okay, so that gets us through our PowerPoint presentation. And I'd like to see if our panelists have joined on. We have, okay, great. We have City Councilman Chris Cate, and we also have Sue Reynolds, who is the CEO of Community Housing Works, a affordable housing developer that has worked in the city for a long time. Thank you both for joining us tonight. I look forward to a good conversation. And of course, thank you all for joining us tonight. Before we get started with questions, I'd like to just note at the outset that both Chris and Sue disagree on this measure, but they do agree on something pretty important to this discussion. They both agree that San Diego has a housing shortage and that it needs to figure out how to produce more housing. They just differ on what the best solution is for that problem. So let's get started. To keep things simple, I think I'd like to start with getting into the basic arguments, and then I'll have you both talk a little bit about the economic moment that we're in and how that shapes this conversation in your mind. Sue, we'll start with you. You support the housing bond, and I went over in the presentation just now, the primer, that we have a significant housing shortage, and we also have an issue where affordable housing that's subsidized is quite costly. Why do you think this bond to back more subsidized affordable housing is the right solution to this problem, whether we're dealing with a pandemic with economic ramifications or not? Sue, you're muted.
I actually think that the council member and I agree on why this is needed. The comprehensive action plan to end homelessness that was unanimously approved said that a bond measure like this was exactly what was needed to meet the critical housing needs that the market just can't meet. Folks who can afford to pay so little that they've been pushed out of the rental market onto the street. We can't address those needs with market tools. We need the kind of investment that the city can provide that can be matched 3 and 4 times by other resources to create the kinds of apartments that'll take people off our streets and off the front stoops of our businesses.
And Chris, you obviously have a different take on this. Why do you think the bond is the wrong approach to this problem?
I think my philosophical views on this, and it comes down to a simple choice, is that I don't fundamentally believe that in order to produce more, as you say, capital A, affordable housing, we actually have to increase the cost of housing for everyday San Diegans. I think if you look at the actions just yesterday by this council, we unanimously approved a project that was going to bring 1,800 units to Mira Mesa, including 180 subsidized affordable housing units that will be built over the next couple of years. We, unfortunately, with some neighborhood opposition, approved a smaller 50-unit project that includes affordable housing units in the northern part of the city in Carmel Mountain Ranch. So I think we're getting to a point where we're addressing all the things that we need to do through those market forces. But the one thing that I think I just disagree with Sue on is, why do we need to increase the cost of housing for San Diegans who are struggling, especially now, even prior to the pandemic, but more so now, in order to build those units? And that's where I think we just have a fundamental disagreement about.
So one of the things that comes up, and I think Chris kind of alluded to here, is that affordable housing, certainly costs a lot, and it can create, costs that some would say get passed along to others, especially in the form directly of a tax. Why does affordable housing cost so much? And is there another solution to get this housing in your view?
Well, I guess the first thing is to note that San Diego outperforms the state in this way. Our average cost of an affordable apartment is $325,000, not $500,000. Thank you, San Diego, for being more sensible than some of the other jurisdictions that are represented in our state. And affordable housing is expensive because housing's expensive. My market rate friends don't find a much more hospitable cost environment than we do. We use the same contractors. We buy the same land. There are no magic wands that make affordable housing different. If you can find a way that takes $90,000 of government money and creates a new affordable apartment for someone who can't afford the inclusionary apartments that Councilmember Cate referred to, then I want to see that method, because I've been working in this work for decades and I haven't yet found it. So this is the broad-based answer that the real estate community has been asking for to help address the affordable housing crisis. And that's why we have the endorsement of the Building Industry Association for this solution for our community.
Before we have Chris respond to what Sue just said, I want to encourage all the folks that are tuning in from home to leave questions and comments. Let us know what you think about what the panelists are saying and if you have questions for them. Chris, I'll let you respond to Sue.
No, I think that there are ways in which to reduce costs. I think there's that competitive nature at the state with the tax allocation board. I mean, it's a competition to, in my opinion, attach a lot of goodies onto projects that increase the cost. You can have a serious conversation. I know it's an uncomfortable one for some people to have, and I understand that, about prevailing wage and the cost that goes in that. We've had projects that have come before our desk on the dais that have cost north of $500,000 per unit to be able to build. And those are unfortunate because we want to all build the units. I think this council, you've seen over the past few years, are doing everything we can to reduce the cost of housing, whether that's making things ministerial by updating our community plans, reducing parking requirements, all these things I think that are on the forefront of reducing the cost of housing, we are adopting. The one thing I will note too that I think is lost on this measure is that this also applies to commercial properties. So if you are a business owner and you lease a property from a commercial property owner and you are in what's called a triple net lease that pays the property taxes on those, on your monthly rental payments, this cost will be passed along to you as well too. You will be paying as a business owner this tax as well. So I don't want that lost on the conversation as well.
Sue, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think the gifted thing about the solution that this bond represents is that it ramps up very gradually over time. So it begins at a relatively low amount of about $3 a month for a typical homeowner and takes 7 years for both those commercial owners who are most affected by our crisis and for homeowners to achieve its still modest impact on all our budgets. And I haven't heard the council member or anyone else, unfortunately, come forward with another solution that will create housing, not just for working folks, inclusionary housing like the Mira Mesa project that the council approved, will create housing that costs $800 a month. But you can imagine that a homeless person who, if they're lucky, gets SSI at a little over $900 a month, can't afford that apartment. And without a broad-based measure, there's going to be continued pressure to lard on these fees to new units that are being built. And so our choices are limited. If we want to address homelessness, we need to share broadly in a cost that's shared broadly so that we all can address what is ranked by most San Diego voters as one of the most pervasive and troubling problems that government has to try to solve.
Chris, if you were in charge, how would the region and the city go about solving this problem, the lack of affordable housing and funding for it?
Well, there's two things that Sue brought up, and I definitely appreciate bringing up. One is homelessness, and one is just the idea of increasing the amount of housing units that goes forward. On the homelessness side, we are starting to build permanent supportive housing units. We're also looking at creative ways to utilize hotel spaces, one of which is in District 6 that just went before the Housing Commission last week. That will be coming before us as well too. If you're looking at broad-based measures, we had one back in March that has life, whether you support it or not, which was the convention center tax increase that included billions of dollars for homelessness as well too within that measure. So if that were to move forward and it's on its last legs, but it's surviving, hopefully it will go forward and be implemented. That's $2.1 billion for homelessness right there as well too. So if you're talking about housing larger in general, I don't think San Diego can be the only one that can carry the burden of trying to figure out how to place the units that we need to address. It's a regional issue. It's a statewide issue. So there are other cities throughout the county who are going to have to do their fair share to increase the amount of units that are being built throughout the region. And I think that's where probably Sue and I agree as well too, is that we need to build more housing units in other parts of the county as well too. It can't just be San Diego, it can't just be downtown, it can't be North Park or Mira Mesa or anywhere else. It has to be that regional approach and getting others to jump aboard to increase the amount of units being built.
Sue, would you like to respond?
Well, the affordable housing advocates were proud to ally ourselves with the mayor and the business community to support the convention center measure. But as Councilmember Cate reflects, that's currently a wish and a legal hope, and the dear Lord only knows what's going to happen. And that isn't going to solve these issues. And waiting for the rest of the region to do something isn't going to solve the issues. And meanwhile, the rest of the state is spending the matching money that we're not getting because we don't have a local stake. So we can just sit here and watch LA and San Francisco spend our good tax money on affordable apartments for homeless folks there, or we can up the stake a little bit and actually make a dent in homelessness in San Diego, something that everyone who has a heart and walks down any of our commercial streets wants to make happen.
And I'm sure we'll talk more about some of the different financing challenges and the state and federal monies that are available. But I do want us to talk, now that we've sort of gotten into the basic arguments here, I think we have to reflect on the economic moment that we're in as well. Certainly there are a lot of challenges. There are more folks on the brink, more people that are without work. Maybe we'll start with Sue on this one. You obviously believe the property tax increase is worth pursuing now. Why do you think it's the right move right now?
I suppose because of the ramping up that I spoke about, and because every dollar that our region puts up gets matched at least 3 to 4 times, such that this will be an economic stimulus that, based on the basic apartment builders calculator, will over this 7-year period of time create literally thousands of jobs and billions of dollars of economic activity. So there aren't many things we can do that give back to our region by this relatively modest, though never to be negated, sacrifice that each one of us has to make in order to make this change for our region possible.
Chris, do you think this is the right moment for a property tax increase in the city?
Absolutely not. And, I appreciate what Sue is saying in terms of the ramping up. I guess I don't want people to be left with the impression that if you vote yes on Measure A in 40 days or so, that miraculously the problems are going to be solved tomorrow and that everything's going to be hunky-dory. That's not the case. And even to be acknowledged that the funding of this is phased in over a number of years. So even the $900 million, which will eventually be $2.1 billion to pay back, will not all come to us the day after this is done. It'll be done over phases. And if you look at other cities that have done the same thing, like Los Angeles, when they passed their measure, they just opened their first units this year. It took them a number of years to even get to that point and have spent millions of dollars on consultants and things like that did not go back into the units. But again, I go back to the fact that I just fundamentally disagree that we have to increase the cost of housing and the cost to our business owners who are already struggling right now in order to pay for this and to hopefully try to reduce the cost of housing and build more of these subsidized affordable units.
So switching gears a bit, and I know we'll touch on a lot of the issues that both of you brought up in your statements here. But the Housing Federation has said that the bond could produce 2,800 new permanent supportive housing units. And I did see that we had a question about permanent supportive housing. So again, permanent supportive housing is housing that comes with services, typically for formerly homeless individuals. There could be case management. There can be community rooms, mental health and substance abuse services, just supports to help that person stabilize. But again, so this bond apparently could, according to projections, fund 2,800 permanent supportive housing units. That also happens to match up with the number in the homelessness plan that Councilman Cate and other city council members approved last fall. Another 4,700 homes could be for low-income individuals and just distributed throughout the community and just be basic units without services attached. Sue, kind of speaking to the issue that, Councilman Cate spoke about in Los Angeles, we know that housing costs are always going up, policies are changing. That's something that they've encountered in Los Angeles. They saw increased cost after passing a similar bond and ended up having to subsidize each unit at a higher rate, which then, results obviously in fewer units. Are you confident that Measure A could fund as many units as advertised?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident because we don't model ourselves after Los Angeles. I sure know that's not where Councilmember Cate looks to for his guidance. And other jurisdictions like San Jose have actually made their numbers and kept costs under control within their weird costs. So I trust the ingenuity of the affordable housing development sector to continue to make this happen. And again, I don't hear an alternative. If folks like seeing homeless folks out their door every day, then a no vote could make sense. If they don't like seeing homeless folks out the door every day and they want to see motion, a dent over time in making a difference in that situation, they should vote for this measure because there are no alternatives currently on the boards for San Diego that would bring us back the dollars we're sending to the state every year and bring us these apartments to get homeless folks off our streets.
And Chris, obviously you are among the city council members who approved the homelessness plan that, suggested obviously that the city needs to produce, this number 2,800 permanent supportive housing units. Would the city realistically be able to meet that goal without a major influx of funding like this bond? And if it's not the bond, where could we potentially get money that would get us to that volume of permanent supportive housing funding?
Yeah, one of the things that I committed to working with Councilman Moreno on, and it becomes a priority getting the council to agree, is to allocate more CDBG funding, community development block grant funding for housing, for homelessness. Right now, it's doled out to a number of different organizations that do great work, but as a council, we have to prioritize. So if housing and homelessness is a priority and we want to be able to use a federal funding source, which can be used for this, that is something we can use. Again, I go back to the convention tax, which I think still exists and it's still lifeblood in there as a potential source as well too. But, I know we're in campaign season and I get that. I hope that voters are not left with an impression that there is this end-all be-all solution, that if you want to end homelessness, vote yes on Measure A or B or C or whatever the ballot measure is. If you want to solve the school crisis, vote yes on Prop 15. That's campaign season, and I get that. We want to pass a measure, but I don't want to leave folks understanding or believing that there is this silver bullet that exists for ending homelessness or ending the housing crisis, whatever it is. There isn't. There is no silver bullet. If there was, we would have done it already, and it would have happened. These are steps to get there, and I agree. Yes, if this could be a potential to help get there, yes, absolutely. Again, I just don't believe that this is the right approach at the right time, given the circumstances we're in from an economic standpoint, not only in the city, in the state, in this country.
So, Sue, one of the key arguments that bond supporters make, and you did earlier as well, is that San Diego has long lacked matching funds. And certainly there's more different types of funding coming in from the state and the federal government right now because of the coronavirus pandemic. But this has been an issue that reporters like me who've been covering housing issues have been hearing about for a while. Can you explain what you're talking about when you talk about the need for matching funds and give some examples of where it might have been helpful or could be helpful for the city going forward to have this matching funding?
Well, Circulate San Diego did a study actually of state monies that we should have gotten, and we're getting about half the state matching monies that we need. You can imagine that to produce apartments that cost less than the market, you need more free money. Our free money locally matches state and privately tax motivated and federally supported free money that makes it possible for us to give apartments to folks who can't afford what it costs to rent a market rate apartment. And I guess I should say that I think this whole economic conditions argument should really be seen in two different ways. One is the difficulties that so many people are having in making their basic costs. And the other is the tsunami of increased homelessness through projected evictions that's currently projected to come at us in the new year when the various moratoriums on paying full rent expire. So if the question is why now, the answer is our community is going to be in even more desperate need very, very shortly.
Chris, would you like to respond? What do you make of this?
Yeah, and you know, I appreciate Sue putting the air quotes around free, because it's not free money. It comes from something. It comes from somewhere. Someone's paying it, so it's coming out of somebody's pocket. But I've increased different potential sources of funding, whether that's the in lieu fee that was just increased. The linkage fee was raised some years back, and there's rumors swirling that's going to be another option. The linkage fee is a fee that's attached to any commercial property development to pay for affordable housing units. I would imagine that's going to be a source of conversation next year, despite what happens in November with Measure A, about potentially increasing that. There was a fee that was attached on real estate transactions with SB2, I think it was, a year and a half, 2 years ago as well, too. So all these different sources are being passed to pay for this free money to build affordable housing units. But again, I go back to the point that no one has talked about how do we reduce the amount and cost of those units. And that's a frustrating part for someone like myself and others who may share in that view, is that, you know, why are sometimes units more costly than a market rate unit to produce in order to make it a subsidized unit? So, you know, a lot of conversations about how to increase fees and revenue for that, but not so much on the other end.
Sue, would you like to provide, you know, I spoke, you know, before we started about how affordable housing financing is kind of like a game of Jenga. There's a lot of different funding sources. And obviously, these housing units do tend to be more expensive than a, you know, typical housing unit. Can you explain why subsidized affordable housing is more expensive, or is so expensive as Chris described?
Well, I think I would contest most of that claim. The careful studies that have been done, like by the Turner Center up at UC Berkeley and by the Tax Credit Allocation Agency, find that if you compare apples to apples, as we like to say, the costs aren't hugely different. Like I said, we're all contracting, we're all paying the permits and fees. My affordable housing developer world isn't that much different than my market rate friends. When the costs look different, it's often because of ways in which we've put reserves and service costs and other things in affordable housing, such that it's not apples to apples. So I actually don't find that the costs, when you compare them correctly, are deeply different. That's been all of the evidence that I've been able to collect. And I guess no one's suggesting we stop building market rate housing until we figure out how to get the costs down. My market rate friends are way frustrated with construction costs. They've gone up horribly in the last 3 years. It's been an awful period. And no one's suggesting we stop building till we figure that out. So why should we stop trying to address homelessness and these non-market needs till we figure it out? We need to figure it out. We're at the table. We're fighting those costs every day. And we are proud to be by the council side and to have gotten the Building Industry Association's endorsement for this measure, because they and we believe that we can fight those costs and deliver truly efficient housing within the constraints that we all face.
I know Chris wants to respond. One thing I wanted to say, we have a few folks mentioning they're having some trouble hearing, so we're all going to try to talk a little bit louder so that people in the audience can hear us. Chris.
And thank you. And no one is suggesting, I am not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that we stop building affordable housing units, we stop building units altogether. By no means am I saying don't build. I mean, I will approve projects. I think I've proven that. I think the council has proven that we're ready to approve projects and get things going. And I agree with the cost of construction has increased. Unfortunately, it's hampered our ability to think as a council to do what we can to reduce at least the government's cost burden share of building units. I would love to build more units and get them going. We've had units come through, and I know we're doing one in Claremont, which was a project, affordable housing project that was a county project that was approved. We have a permanent support housing project in Claremont that we approved as well too. I mean, so we're doing what we can to get things through, and I am by no means suggesting that we stop building, but there are some things out of the council's control that we can do that we need advocates at a statewide perspective to look at ways in which the state can do their share in reducing the cost as well too.
Chris, do you want to provide any specifics on what it would be helpful for the state?
I think what I mentioned earlier, the tax credit allocation board is the requirements that are placed on folks like Sue and others to build these projects and get the finance, because it's competitive, right? You're competing with other projects up and down the state and trying to do things that get you the points and scoring that you need to get that financing. That's one thing that you can look at as well too. I mean, there's a great story about the environmental requirements, the secret requirements of a project in Solana Beach that have resulted in a project costing more than $1.1 million per unit to build as well too. So there are a number of things I think that can be done. Unfortunately, they're out of our control at a local level.
So and I'm glad to say that I am amongst the representatives on Treasurer Fiona Ma's task force that's been working at the statewide level to implement the kinds of changes that the council member is calling for. So I think your reference to the fact that there is no silver bullet is absolutely correct. We need to do everything all at once. But if we shoot BBs at a problem that's at a scale that needs large resources, we're not even going to see any difference. If you pass this measure, you will begin to see a difference. If you don't pass this measure, the kinds of resources that the council member is referencing from CDBG and all that, those are great, but they're BBs, and the problem is too big. We need this kind of resource over multiple years to make the kind of dent that San Diegans have told us they want to make.
So I want to hit on one last issue, and then we're going to open it up to questions that we're getting from the audience. So there was a last minute change to the ballot language just before the San Diego City Council voted to send this to voters. Without getting into too many of the weeds, essentially, I'm going to try to keep it high level for you all here. Market rate developers in San Diego essentially have to either incorporate affordable housing in their projects or subsidize those units elsewhere. So in a deal with market rate developers, supporters of Measure A agreed to give developers a credit or some sort of other mechanism to be determined for their affordable housing investments, whether that came in the form of, the inclusionary measure or also the linkage fee that Chris spoke about earlier, to just give them a credit for investments they've essentially have already made in their view. Sue, how would this work and why was it included?
Well, actually, one of the unexpected gifts of needing a 2/3 vote to pass a tax is it encourages the advocates to speak to a broad range of people who could support or oppose it. It's part of how we keep our community together. And this measure has a broad range of support from the Building Industry Association, from the Downtown Partnership, from the San Diego taxpayers, precisely because the advocates have refused to get backed into some kind of partisan corner and have said, we need to work together on a method that's fair. The Building Industry Association and folks in the business community have said for years, we need a broad-based measure. And if there's a broad-based measure, we should have a fair way to take that into account when we have these narrower fees that are assessed against apartments. So we came together to say, Yes, there should be a fair way to make sure that folks aren't paying twice. Our builders and developers, we need them to create more market rate housing. We don't want them to pay twice either. And so we've come up with, I don't think it's a deal, it's an old-fashioned coalition saying there is a way to do this fairly, and we'll be calling upon the new council under hopefully Councilmember Cate's leadership after the bond passes to look at a fair way to make sure that developers are assessed fairly for the housing that they create in the future.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
Look, I mean, a deal was cut, and we're in politics. I mean, it happens. It's all good. You know, from an implementation standpoint and an administration standpoint, you know, I have no clue how it's going to work. You know, if it does pass, we're going to have to live with it and deal with it and figure it out. But I have no idea how we implement this, how we determine the credit and how it apply on how it's paid. Even so, you know, I don't know if the county needs to be involved from a treasurer tax collector standpoint. I have no clue how this would work, and I'm not sure if you know, our development services department staff or others have gotten to the weeds and to figure this out. You know, should this pass, how does this look to ensure that those folks who are going to be asking for that credit it's done? So I don't know is pretty much my answer.
And what was said at the time that the city council sent this to the ballot essentially was that this would be something that would be hashed out. The specifics of it would be hashed out if it passes. So the new city council members and others that are currently sitting on the city council, they would be making this decision later this year or early next, likely.
Add it to our list.
Yes. I do want to start to get into some great questions that we've gotten from our audience here. Question from John. He asked, could the funds raised by Measure A be used to subsidize accessory dwelling units or granny flats that are deed restricted as affordable housing units for a period of time? And what are your thoughts on subsidizing ADUs, as some call them, in high transit areas? We'll start with Sue on that.
Certainly that's an eligible expense. It would take a long time, one by one, to do that, but smaller communities like Santa Cruz have started to work on that solution. And I believe we need to do everything all at once to address these issues. The odds that there are that many homeowners who want to rent to a formerly homeless resident aren't that high. So I think that this solution has to be one of a number of solutions that we use to address a really diverse problem.
So another question from Amanda. She asked, does the measure include any restrictions on where the housing is built? That's another question for Sue.
The measure specifically says that the city is committed to developing these apartments across the city. So that is consistent with the council's commitment to have a problem that's shared by the city, have the solution shared across the city. And each project, of course, has to go through the usual review and all the planning and zoning and all that good stuff. So there's no secret path. Everything goes through the same process that addresses the community accountability issues that all our communities care about.
And
yeah,
go on, Chris.
I just want to add real quick, and nor would I think any of us want to limit where housing is built. That is by no means something that, at least myself, and I would like to speak on behalf of my colleagues, I think, in saying that we would never support anything that says units have to be built in this location and not in another neighborhood.
So the next question I have is from Cate, and this is a question that I think both of you could address. Cate asked, what are some of the significant factors contributing to the increased housing construction costs that the San Diego City Council has the capacity to address? And she also asked, who profits if Measure A passes? So, Chris, this one's for you.
I mean, I think the one thing that, again, going back to the things that Sue and I probably do agree on, is time. I mean, time is money when it comes to construction, and anything that we can do as a city to reduce the amount of time it takes to locate a project, go through the permitting process, design, getting grading permits, and the like, are ways in which we can save developers money, which would then reduce the cost of the unit. I mean, parking was the biggest thing where, what, $90,000, $100,000 a unit for parking. And what can we do to reduce the parking requirements that go along with building projects? I think that's why you've seen a big emphasis on getting community plan updates processed and approved, because that allows for the construction of units without having to go through what we call a community plan amendment and going through what's called another thing called a discretionary review project, which takes more time. You got to go through planning groups and planning commissions, city council for approval. If you're already zoned to build those units, we just shaved off probably years from your process time.
So the second question, Sue, maybe you'd like to answer: who profits if Measure A passes? You're both on the hook for this one.
Well, I run a nonprofit that builds affordable housing. Every dollar that we make by developing affordable housing goes back into services so that our residents do better in the future. So we will create jobs. General contractors, surveyors, engineers, architects will be paid for their services. But actually, the affordable housing sector is fiendishly regulated. And the amount of money that we are allowed as developers to make from these projects hasn't gone up in years and years and years. So it's always the correct question: follow the money. But between that and the taxpayer's role in creating an oversight committee that will include business folks who are going to be keeping an eye on the costs, I think the public's interests will be well protected in this.
So, question from Sarah. She asked, can either Sue or Councilmember Cate speak to how houseless San Diegans feel about Measure A? What kind of outreach or research has been done that includes them?
Well,
Sue,
the voices of our city choir, which is the voice of many of our homeless and formerly homeless folks, has been a proud supporter of this measure from the beginning. I guess my working assumption is that people don't want to go to sleep on the stoops of the SDG&E service building or my hairdresser's business on Washington Avenue. So I don't think there's a lot of controversy about whether homeless folks actually want to sleep under a roof.
Next question comes from Mia. Chris, would you like to respond to that?
I was going to say, I don't disagree with that. I don't think necessarily to that if you are an individual who's looking for a place to live and wants services, I don't think you necessarily really care so much as to how that it is done. And I would agree that I think we need to do everything possible to try to provide services and get individuals off the streets and into a home. And that's where I think just from a process standpoint, there's some disagreement on. So I don't know, again, how I want to generalize or assume how people feel about it, but I think at the end of the day, they just want a place to go and get the services that they need.
So one more question that I think both of you could probably tackle. I think I've had conversations with both of you, in fact, about this very topic. Mia asked, do you feel that CEQA has hindered the possibilities of affordable housing solutions? Chris is laughing. I'll let Chris go first.
Yes.
And explain, please. Janice asked, can you explain what CEQA is? We'll give you that assignment.
So California Environmental Quality Act, and I'm sure Sue has dealt with this more than I have from a process standpoint, but going through different procedures at council, again, it goes back to the time issue, from getting your notice to right to appeal, having an appeal go through on the whether it's an exemption determination or whatnot, that takes time. Having a process, an actual environmental impact report takes time. It's a process to get comments and reply to those comments. and the like on things that, I think really don't have any necessarily burdensome bearing on the environment as a whole. Going through different projects that we've had to gone through, just in my district alone, again, this process adds a year, 14, 18, 2 years to get through it. So I think it just goes back to that time standpoint in which if you're looking to increase the cost of housing, delay it, because that's going to increase those costs.
Sue?
There's a lot of unintended consequences of CEQA that go to exactly the time issues that the council member addresses. I think the good news is for housing that supports the needs of homeless folks, the state's been carving out some of those unintended consequences and protecting housing that's created for homeless people from some of those unintended consequences. But this is a big issue our state needs to continue to wrestle with if we're going to get the housing at all income levels produced that we need to produce and still protect the environment that makes this state a state we're proud of.
So I want to thank the audience for some really great questions here. I think I want to have Sue, you and Chris also end here, because we only have a couple more minutes, with your elevator pitches on why voters should or shouldn't support this. And we'll start with Sue. Why should voters support Measure A in November?
I don't think I know a single person who doesn't tell me that homelessness hurts their heart every day, and that the need